Have you ever wondered why the water in a lake, as you get deeper, gets much, much colder? I bet my sister-in-law Laura would know. Let's give her a call. Oh, hey, Laura. I am so glad I caught you. I was just in the lake and I was wondering when I go further down into the lake, it feels like my feet get colder. Do you have any idea why that is?
That's a really great question. Let's dive in. This isn't really how we study the lake, but come on, I'll show you.
Well, it's a lot warmer in here. Hi, my name is Laura, and thanks for joining me on the temperature tour of Lake Lunz. I'm a scientist at the Wasserkluster Lunz Biological Station in Austria, and Lake Lunz behind me is the lake I just jumped in. The temperature difference you experience sometimes when swimming in a lake is a process called stratification.
So let's look at the profile of our lake. So this is like slicing the lake down the middle, and here's the water on top. In summer, the sun heats the surface of the lake, making the top layer warmer and lighter. The deeper water stays colder and heavier, so it doesn't mix with the top. The line where the warm and cold water meet is called the thermocline, and is where the water temperature changes rapidly from warm to cold. To look at this better, here's a graph of what our lake temperature looks like. Temperature is increasing from left to right, and depth increases as you go down. Here's our temperature example. And as you can see, the dotted line is the thermocline, which is the section of the lake, again, where the temperature decreases rapidly as the lake gets deeper, and serves as a boundary between the warm and cold layers.
To represent what happens in a lake, we've got a little demonstration here. We have hot water with the red food coloring and cold water with the blue food coloring. And we're going to show what happens differently with the different amounts of water when hot's on top versus when the cold's on top, because it does affect how the currents and convection happens in the lake. So I'm going to start by taking this blue one and putting it on top of the red one. As you see, it mixes almost immediately and it's completely purple top and bottom. So the cold water is going down and mixing immediately with the red hot water. Now we're going to do the opposite with the hot water on the top. Now, there's still a little bit of mixing at the middle, but there's a really clearly defined cold zone at the bottom, and there's still pretty clearly defined hot at the top. So there is a little bit of mixing, but the hot water, because heat rises, wants to stay on the top, whereas the cold, which sinks to the bottom, wants to stay on the bottom. And there's a little bit of a mix right here in the middle. This is the thermocline in the lake.
Now, I'd like you to take 5 minutes and think about how different seasons might affect your temperature stratification in your lake. Your teacher will give you a worksheet, and I'd like you to draw each lake stratification for each of the seasons: summer, spring, winter, and fall. Think about, for example, how ice cover in winter might change things, or a windy season in the fall or spring might change things. We'll come back in a few minutes and see how you did. How did it go? Let's go over it together.
We already talked about what happens in summer. The sun heats the surface of the lake, making the top layer warmer, while the bottom layer stays cold. Between these two layers, the thermocline forms, where the temperature drops quickly. In the fall, as temperature cools down, the surface water starts cooling, becoming denser, or in other words, heavier. This causes the surface water to sink, and the layers mix again in the fall turnover. Storms and wind can speed up this process. The temperature is uniform throughout the lake. This mixing also spreads oxygen throughout the lake. Spreading oxygen around the lake is important because everything that lives in the lake needs oxygen in the water to breathe. And we'll talk about oxygen more in a minute. In the winter, the surface water cools even more and can even freeze, forming ice. The cold water stays at the top, while slightly warmer water is at the bottom. Water near freezing is lighter because the molecules spread out in a unique way, making it less dense. This is why ice floats. It's even lighter in the cold water. The lake stays stratified, but in reverse, with colder water on top and warmer water below. And once again, there's a thermocline as the boundary between these two layers. Back to spring. As the ice melts and the temperatures rise, the water on the surface warms up and mixes with the water below. Wind from spring storms also helps in the mixing. This creates a period of mixing called spring turnover, where the entire lake has similar temperatures, similar to fall turnover.
Back at the lake, Laura, in the winter this time. And the top of the lake is frozen. But I know from our discussion that there's a lot going on under the ice.
But it's not just temperature that changes with lake depth in stratification, but also you have to think about light and oxygen. For now, let's look at our summer lake stratification again.
Here again is our summer stratification. If we look at the graph to the left, we see once again temperature decreasing with depth in blue. Dissolved oxygen in the water, which, like I mentioned before, is very important for life, also decreases in a similar pattern in green. This is because since the layers are separated from each other, the deeper, colder water has less opportunity to mix with the surface water, resulting in a lower oxygen concentration. Also in the cold, deep layer, oxygen gets more rapidly used up by the animals that live there. Light, on the other hand, decreases more steadily as water gets deeper.
For your next activity, imagine you're trying to find a home for different lake plants and animals. Based on their needs and what you learned about light, temperature, and oxygen, find different plants and animals their perfect home. It's Habitat House Hunters. I'm going to let Sarah walk you through this.
Thanks, Laura. So, Habitat House Hunters, the latest rad fad in real estate, is so exciting. I'm so glad you're here to join us for this. So, you are going to be helping out Wiley Weasel, the real estate agent for this particular lake area. His clients are creatures listed on the worksheet. They're looking for the perfect home. If you can match them with what they need in terms of light, oxygen, and temperature, they will get their dream home. It's a happy ending for everyone. So on this first page, we have fish. You are required to have at least one fish on your lake. So read through these 3 fish about what kinds of needs they have, and then look back at our drawing that we did before about where is there a lot of light, where is there cold water, where there's warm water, what about the oxygen, and based on that, place your fish exactly where it needs to go. You need to have one other creature. So maybe we have some bird options, we have dragonflies, frogs, salamanders, moose, muskrat, beaver, leech. Pick one of those from these pages. You are also going to then have some plant. You're required to have at least one plant. Now, with these plants, you need to have one of these plants, either duckweed, cattail, equisetum, pond lily. If you want to have more, that's fine, but you have to have a minimum of one. And every lake, no matter what other plants you have, has to have some algae because that's an important part of this ecosystem to make sure everything's going the right way. So read through all of the descriptions of the clients, the plants, the creatures, and the fish to make sure that you've got exactly the right thing in exactly the right space. So when you go down, you'll have this printed version, and you need to cut out or draw your own version of these creatures and place them in the exact right spot based on their dream home needs. Now, to show that you understand why each kind of creature is going in different places, you're going to need to fill out this final part of the worksheet. So in this middle column where it says light, temperature, oxygen, you're going to read through the clues in the client's information, and you're going to write a note to yourself about what amount of light do they need? What kind of temperature do they look for? What oxygen content can they handle? Once you have written down sort of your notes about what the client wish lists are, based on that, you need to go to the second part here and write down a general idea of where in the lake. You don't have to have exactly where you put it in your lake example, but you do need to have the general part of the lake. Is it in deep water? Is it in shallow water? Is it by the shore? Is it by the bank? And just a reminder, the bank is the side of the lake where the water touches the land. That's called a lake bank or a river bank if it's a river. After you've filled out this for all of the creatures and plants that you have used for your lake, go on to this final column and tell us about why did you pick that particular spot. So for example, I saw that this client wanted lots of light, so I put them higher up. And I saw that they wanted a temperature, and that's why I put them where they were. So it does not need to be complete sentences, but it does need to show that you were thinking about why your specific thing goes in that part of the lake. Happy house hunting!
Hi again, welcome back. Did you find the perfect home for your plants and animals? It can be a bit tricky because each plant or animal has specific light, oxygen, and temperature needs. Hopefully you found your plants and animals a perfect place to live, but now you can see why stratification is important for these creatures. You might be wondering how we measure temperature in lakes. Here on Lake Loons, we've been collecting temperature data for over 100 years. Behind me, way in the distance, floating on the lake, you can see our man-made measurement island. On this floating island, temperature sensors or thermometers measure the lake temperature every single day. The sensor travels to the bottom of the lake, measuring the temperature at different layers.
Now I want to show you what these measurements look like and why it's important to measure lake temperature many times over a long time. Take a look at this graph of temperature data from Lake Loons. This is the last 100 years of temperature data collected from the measurement station. On the x-axis on the bottom is the years, starting in 1920, going all the way to 2020. On the y-axis is the temperature, the average surface temperature per year in Celsius. Celsius is just another way to measure temperature besides Fahrenheit. Each point is the average temperature for 1 year. The blue dots are the colder temperatures and the red dots are the warmest temperatures. What do you notice here? I see some years were much warmer, like 1950 and 2020, while other years, like 1980 and 1941, were much colder. However, if you look at the big trend, which is this gray in the background, this gray line, you see that overall the lake temperature is warming. This is why measuring long term is important. If we measured just 1 year, we would not know if it is an especially warm year or an especially cold year. And if we measured in the last year, we would not know how much the lake has changed over time. Additionally, this graph shows that even if we have one cold year, it doesn't mean that things aren't getting warmer, because we can see from here, things in the lake are definitely warming up.
And this is why having lots of measurements is important to understand how climate change impacts our lake ecosystems. Temperature changes in the lake can impact the plants and animals that live there. Remember in your last activity, your plants and animals had very specific requirements for their habitats. How do you think changing temperature would affect those habitats? Thank you for joining me on our temperature tour of Lake Loons. I hope you enjoyed the lesson. Oh wait, I have to check in with Sarah.
Oh, it's Laura.
Hey Sarah, does that answer your question about why the water gets colder deeper?
Yes, this was so helpful. I really enjoy it, and I can't wait to share it with my students. Catch you later.
Oh great, no problem. Thanks for the great question. Bye.
Welcome to the Teacher's Guide. I hope that I can give you some tips and tricks so this can go as smoothly as possible for you. Activity 2 can be super fun. It can also get away from you in terms of time depending on how you're setting it up and how you are preloading things for your students so that in the moment it can go smoothly. Depending on the age of your students, there's a lot of possibilities here for deeper dives and more applications of critical thinking. I'm going to show you some of the things about the House Hunters worksheet so that you can adjust it if you need to for your group, etc. So I wanted to start out by saying that all of the details about the different animals, creatures, plants, etc., all came from the Alaska Fish and Game website. And I have some of those links in here, which will be in the PDF of the Teacher's Guide. So just if you want to change this up so that it matches more with the animals in your area, I definitely recommend checking out your Fish and Game or something similar for your area to find things that are more specific to the spaces that you are in. I tried to pick things that were not just Alaskan, but could also be in different areas. But since my classroom is in Alaska, I did focus on Alaskan parts of it. Next, I wanted to show you the worksheet itself. So one of the things when you see this file, when you print it, please make sure that you do not print it double-sided, as students are going to need to cut out these little pictures of the fish, plants, whatever. And if you double-sided print this worksheet, you won't be able to they won't be able to cut it out. So, and that's fine if you don't mind that they are going to like draw their own, or if you're going to have, if you're doing it a different way, that's fine. Just be aware that this worksheet is designed to be a single-sided page so that it can be cut out. And then I wanted to go down with our with the lake part of the worksheet. If you'd like, you can actually print off this part separately and give it to students. If you wanted to make the pieces separate, like all of the client pictures, you can do that separately and just hand the kids one of these papers as well as the final paper. Now, this final paper, because there's a lot going on with it, I recommend that you do at least one of these parts with your students, because otherwise they will get confused. There's a lot of different information squeezed into our little client profiles, and it takes some good critical thinking to be able to piece together what the kind of riddles are saying in order to find out which part of the lake the animal or plant should be. And I just wanted to show you some student examples of the habitat hunters and what it might look like with some misconceptions and some ways that they did a good job. So for example, this student, because we were talking about the temperature, colored the lake warm on the top and then having a thermocline in the middle, and then the darker blue down here to show like where the temperature is coldest. And they placed their animals, I don't know if you can see them, but they did a good job. So they've got a leech and a fish and their algae, their plants over here, and a moose, which is both eating the plants, which is something we see here in Alaska regularly. So obviously they were on point with that one. This is another one that's just beautiful. This student chose to draw their own version of the animals instead of just using the options that we put in the worksheet. So I really like this one because we've got a fish down here. We have a swan. This one is a little bit harder to tell which one is which because things are not labeled as clearly. So that's something to definitely like talk to with your students about this assignment when you do it. Is labels are really helpful. And if they're going to do something beautiful like this and they don't want to mess up their drawing, even just having like a white marker or a white colored pencil to put a number by these things that they put in there would make it a lot easier to tell if they're using their original artwork. Because I think it does add a lot to the experience if they have original artwork, but there is then the risk of things not being as easy to tell. This is another one that used the idea of the warmer water is on the top and the colder water is on the bottom. So they have a red part of the lake and a blue part of the lake. Their thermocline is maybe a little bit higher than it should be, but this is that's something to be aware of. And part of the reason why we do the seasonal change and seasonal parts of the lake first before this is so that this makes more sense. So it's also possible that this student was trying to depict a lake in a different part of the year. But one of the things that I thought was fun is they added a different kind of fish. This is a salmon. Since things in Alaska are often related to salmon, this makes sense. It shows that they're making it as part of their own place. And that's something to think about when you do this activity. You can localize this as much as you need to in order to make it about the animals that are in your lakes where you live. Because it's very possible that you don't have the same kinds of animals, plants, creatures, etc. that we have in Alaska. So that's why I picked this particular like set of clients. But it is not that difficult to change things up a little bit so that you have things that are more local that make sense for your group. This particular one, they've got a loon and a moose. This one's not on top of this is not in the water, though the other one did show the moose underwater. Both of those are correct. Moose do actually spend a lot of time swimming. So this one also has, they did sort of a combination of drawing their own versus using the pictures that we provided. And so having this as a example of you can use both, whichever works better. But both of these all three of these show animals in the correct part of the lake based on how much light and oxygen they would receive, and also shows a lot of good creativity. Hopefully that helps. I would recommend, if you have students that are lower level or struggling readers and writers, that you might want to balance how this is working, and maybe they would have only the plants in one group and only the animals in another group, and that way it's a way of scaffolding if that is what your students need. I would also start off by giving the last page of the Habitat Hunters worksheet first. So that is this page here with the list of what animals they put where and the light, temperature, oxygen. I would also make sure that everybody's cool with the idea of where do things go in the lake. Just like, what does low oxygen look like? What does high oxygen look like? Cold, warm, sort of reiterating what you talked about in activity 1. Just maybe even have a simplified diagram of the lake on your board. And if you wanted to do it as more of a group activity instead of each student having an individual lake that they're creating, you could draw on your board or have a bigger printout of the lake shape, or even if you have a projector, project it onto a whiteboard, and then different groups can bring up their contribution to the lake and explain why they're putting it there. I would also recommend students use some kind of highlighters or other color coding system to help clarify what elements in the client's wish list represents which part of the lake. So in your diagram for the whole group, I would recommend having some sort of color coding of okay, low light, low oxygen, and sort of labeling those things with different colors so that while students are going through the Habitat Hunters worksheet, they can keep that in their mind. And I have a teacher's version of the same worksheet. So in that one, it is a slightly different version just because it needs to have all of the answers, all the correct answers for that, and I can show you what that looks like. All of my research and the information about each fish, plant, client in this activity, it came from the Alaska Fish and Game website. I tried to find things that would be in many different areas, but if you want to adapt this worksheet to be what works for your area, that's totally fine. I would recommend looking into Fish and Game or whatever website, organization, etc., that your area uses to find local things, because that does make a difference in how students perceive the information. Oh, this is my home. These are plants and animals and things that I see in a lake near my home. That makes it a little bit more real in some ways. Another way that if you wanted to go deeper and get more in depth, and if you had a group of students that was really interested and motivated, one of the things that you could do is after you've done this whole activity, then either have a discussion or make another version of this, and the baseline temperature of the lake has increased by 5 degrees. What happens? And then tie this into a discussion of climate change and how bodies of water are holding temperature differently, and how that will affect our societies going forward with global warming and climate change. Thanks. I hope this was helpful.